Hey guys, it's John and Shannon from ThatDIYCouple.
We just got back from an amazing, unbelievable trip to India and Nepal, and we're going to give you our impressions of India.
So, your impressions of India start a long time ago.
Yeah, so I lived in India for about 3 months. It's actually kind of how we met. I think we made a video describing a little bit how we met in that context. But I lived in India between my junior year and senior year in college. And I was there living in Delhi doing an internship, like really air quotes internship, just outside of Delhi. But I ended up just mostly traveling around India. And my number one impression of India, so this is in 2007 when I was last there. It was really, at the time, it was like the first time I'd ever really traveled outside of the US, except for very short excursions. It was certainly the first time I'd ever lived outside of the US. And it was super overwhelming and very transformative for me at the time. So coming back to India over a decade later was very special for that reason. So my impressions of India 2007 versus 2019 are like way different. India has changed a lot in the 12 years since I've been there, for the better. So when I was there in 2007, there was no Uber, no like ride sharing service. Now there is, and that's totally changed how to get around India, particularly Delhi where I was living and where we were visiting. There was horrible pollution. There's still really bad pollution. We'll get into that, but it's improved quite a bit. Just the general wealth and sort of well-being of people in India has changed massively for the better. But having said all that, our impressions of India, my impressions of India, India is still a developing country in like every sense of the word. So there's a juxtaposition in India today, as there has been for a long time, between people who have money and who have privilege and people who do not have privilege. India is the world's largest democracy, which is sometimes hard to remember and hard to think about. It's the world's largest democracy by far. Over 1 billion people live there. And it's a pluralistic society, and so there are people of different religions and ethnic groups and linguistic groups and whatever else. However, there are very large differences between people who have money and people who don't have money. So when you go to India, if you've never been there before, that's going to hit you immediately. You're going to see people that are more impoverished than you've ever seen them, and you're going to see people that are as rich as any person that you might encounter in the West. That's like number one. That hits you everywhere, I think. We stayed at some really nice hotels, and we will do videos on some of those hotels that we've stayed at, and those are definitely catered towards like Western people who have Western expectations and who frankly have enough money to pay Western prices for a hotel. But that is not like how, it's a part of India, and like the service culture, the luxury culture is a part of India, but it's way different than how 99.99% of all Indians live.
I'll say that my first impressions of India when I arrived were just that it was very overwhelming and very chaotic. You get into the airport and they have signs that, it's the nicest airport in the world, and they've recently apparently redone the airport.
The Delhi airport is nice. Yeah.
So the terminal that we arrived looked like it had just been renovated to what I would describe in the West as like 1970s standards. And then we later visited a different terminal that was like incredibly nice. But when we arrived, I was like, this airport is like really old and dated. And then you get out, and I was just so overwhelmed by the sheer number of people that you see everywhere.
Yeah.
So there was just
people like hanging out
everywhere at all hours, and like sleeping everywhere.
We got
outside.
in at one like illustrative story is that we flew into, our flight arrived in Delhi at like 2 a.m. local time, I think. Mm-hmm. And we were in Terminal 3, which actually I think is quite nice. I don't think it's as bad as Shannon had said. But
it's not bad. I'm just saying it looked dated.
I think it's not like 1970s, maybe like 1990s. But they just built it, which is...
They built it, and they chose carpet from like 1970s.
They used LaGuardia as their inspiration. LaGuardia is a terrible airport. But anyways, so you exit the gate, and then you go through customs and whatever, which is actually really fast, and they had pretty good signage. But we kind of went through that, and then you walk through the duty-free area, massive duty free, like a supermarket of duty free. And at 2 a.m. or whatever time it was, there were probably like 30 employees there at the duty free, just like waiting for people from this one flight to come through.
Waiting for like free tourists to come through.
And it was crazy because you're like, it's 3 a.m. Like in the
so
U.S.
my first thought was like
you know,
the cost of labor to employ people is just so low
and it
compared
is.
to
It
the
really
United
is.
States that
Yeah.
they can afford to have like 30 employees.
Yeah.
I think in any situation there seems to be like one employee who's attending to you and then like 6 employees who are helping that person. And for us that's very bizarre. I mean, it makes sense though that we would find the sheer quantity of Indian people in India overwhelming. It's a much, much larger country than the United States. I think the United States has what, like 350 million people? I'm not entirely sure what we're at right now. And India has over 1 billion. So if you think about it, there's probably around 3 times more Indian people or more than there are American people, and so in a smaller geographical area, correct? I think so. It's it makes sense that to us it would seem crowded.
Yeah.
I think that we should also, towards the beginning of this video, describe a little bit what we did, what our experiences were in India, because India is so enormous that our impressions are not going to be representative of the country as a whole, but rather just the brief thoughts of 2 American tourists in mostly Delhi.
Yeah, our goal with this, so I'd been in India before, as I said earlier, and when I was in India, I did like all the tourist things that you can do in North India. So I was in Delhi, which is in North India, the capital of India, and I did all the tourist things in Delhi, which are many. I traveled around India to Agra, Jaipur, so I saw the Taj Mahal. I saw like many different red forts. I went to Varanasi, which is a very holy city of the Ganges. I went everywhere. This trip, I had done that already. Shannon didn't really have an interest in doing that, and we found
Well,
both
it's
of
not that
us.
we have an interest. We didn't have time. I would like to do those things
Well,
another time.
in the context of things we wanted to do, it was not the highest thing on our list. We have found that our vacations, what we really like, are really kind of relaxing, non-stressful, necessarily like this is like what you must see when you go to the place type experiences. We like relaxing, taking stuff in, maybe doing things a little bit off the beaten path, not being like hectically moving around place to place because we have to see this thing, that thing, whatever thing.
And we like authentic cultural experiences. Yeah. So this time when we were in Delhi, we spent several days in Delhi kind of enjoying, when we go to a big city, what we like to do is enjoy the culture. So we went to some of the nicest restaurants in Delhi. We went to some of the like off the beaten path cheap restaurants in Delhi, and we spent some time doing things that locals do, like walking around the parks and walking around some of the more interesting touristy areas, and then we had the really wonderful opportunity to visit our friend in Patna in the state of Bihar, where we got to meet his mom and his grandma and his dad. And because his dad happens to be a political figure in India who is running for office, we had an opportunity to get to know a little bit more about how Indian democracy works and to visit, for example, an untouchable village out in Patna that we would never have had an opportunity to get to see if we hadn't been accompanied by him and his kind of security forces.
Yeah, and we'll do a whole video on that experience, which was totally different, and I have a lot of impressions about that. But
the thing that I want to stress though is that our experience and our opinions are very limited because it would be impossible to ask us to evaluate India as a whole because we've never been to all of India, and they're limited by both geographic reach, they're limited by time, they're limited by just being born foreigners and not speaking the language. But I do want to stress that we did both high culture activities as well as sort of more down to earth talking to actual people. So we had an opportunity to really interact with a number of locals from different economic backgrounds and from different religious backgrounds.
Yeah. One thing very broadly, so my first impression about India was how much it had changed, but still the disparity between people that have and have not. Another thing that I would just say immediately off the cuff about India, which you'll probably find coming to India from the West, is how visceral it is. Like you walk off the airplane and It's hot. It's very hot in India. Almost anywhere in India, almost all the time relative to the West. Humid. There's a smell, and it's not like a pleasant smell. It's not a bad smell. It's just a unique smell. It's like a smell of India, all pervasively everywhere. The airport, hotels, restaurants, wherever else. There are vibrant colors everywhere in India. So people love to wear.
On the smell point, I will say that bathing is much less common. I think.
Deodorant is less common. Deodorant is less common.
Okay.
Yeah, I think bathing is.
I think actually we learned that regionally bathing is sometimes more common than in the West. In different regions, people bathe different amounts, and access to clean water is a legitimate issue. Bathing with a bucket tends to be fairly common, but I would notice that, for example, on the airplane, there was just a stank. People were kind of ripe. And by the time that I left India, I was smelling the same way because I was it's so hot. And people dress in a way that's conservative and modest. So they're not airing themselves out the way that we might in the West. But I did notice, getting into the first elevator to leave the airport, surrounded by all these Indian men, I was I was almost overwhelmed by the body odor.
There's a stank. India is very visually colorful. I would say people, particularly women, tend to wear very, very colorful clothing, not muted colors at all, bright red, bright blue, bright pink.
Fabrics are so gorgeous.
Yeah, but you'll see that
beautiful.
Immediately when you come out. So it's boom, cars are colorful. The rickshaws are green and yellow. The taxi cabs will have paintings on them. Buses will have things on them that you wouldn't see in the West. So lots of colors.
It's very verdant and lively. Yeah. Lots of things grow in India. So you're driving down the street and you see all sorts of fruits and vegetables and greenery and beautiful flowers. Yep. There's a real strong flower culture. You arrive and they have this lovely tradition of greeting you traditionally with some marigolds. So when we got to the hotel, we were greeted with a string of beautiful and just fragrant, the best smelling fragrant marigolds. And when our friend greeted us, he did the same thing. He gave us these lovely marigolds, and they put a little piece of I don't know how to describe it, but almost like a pigment on you.
It's like an oil or something.
As a blessing.
Yeah.
And then the inside of the residences and hotels, perhaps to counteract the smell outside, was just very florid and a lovely, lovely smell.
Yeah, perfumed.
Perfumed, yeah.
And then, the other sense is the sound. India is very loud. Certainly Delhi is very loud because you have a combination of a ton of people, like Shannon was saying before. You have a lot of cars on the roads. I mean, you have cars that in the West, you would say this is a 2-lane or a 3-lane road, that in India is accommodating 10 cars at the same time. And there's very much a culture of honking all the time for everything. Honking doesn't have the same meaning as it does in the West, which is normally hey, I'm annoyed, or you're blocking me, or you need to go. In honking, Indian honking sometimes means that, but it could also mean hey, I'm passing on the right.
It's a passing thing. When you're trying to pass somebody.
Yeah, thank you. I'm here. Watch out. I'm doing whatever. I'm behind you. So you go on the road, honk constantly, all hours of the day. When you're in your room in a hotel, the hotels that we were in were a little bit from the streets, you can hear it, but you open the door and it's blast, honking all the time. People will be talking all the time because there's so many people hanging out, always talking on their phones, calling, all sorts of, so it just, stuff's going on.
It's a sensory explosion.
Yeah, it's an explosion.
And you feel very much the life and the vibrancy of the people and the culture.
Yeah, when I came back to where we live here in the States, I remember the morning after we got back, I walked outside and it was our quiet street with birds chirping and just oh my gosh, it just so quiet. Even that we were hiking in Nepal and that was its own type of quiet, but for an area where people live, it was oh my gosh, there's no one around. The only people that are around are a guy walking his dog. I mean, it's hard to see that in India. Any hour of the day, any place we go where there are people in Delhi.
Yeah. I will say too that it feels like there's very little rule of law when it comes to traffic laws. It's just like Grand Theft Auto, people like going the wrong way down the street. But I didn't feel unsafe in any of the cars. It was like a controlled chaos.
In Nepal.
But in India, I didn't feel unsafe. I mean, I would say that the quality of the roads in Delhi seemed fine, but I noticed that just like things that we respect in the West in terms of rules and laws and regulations seemed to be like very flaunted in India in
like
terms of like
line culture.
There's no line
no
culture
line
in India.
Yeah.
So just like the cutting, like, you know, you'd be waiting in line for the bathroom and then someone, usually like an older woman, would just come with like zero shits to give and like totally cut you off. And it was so frustrating. It happened so many times. You had to kind of learn how to like
the lines
push.
in India are like here is like, say this is where you need to go, and you'd like put a line here. In the States or in the West, you'd line up like here. In India, it's like there's a guy here and here and here and here and here and there and also there and there, and it's like all people at all times are trying to go right to that point. And so you're like, whoa. So you have to be forceful. You know, you have to like, I need to go.
It's contentious. It's not pleasant. And other things just like didn't feel like there was a ton of like environmental regulations, or if there was, they weren't being adhered to.
I would say yes and no. I think like the vehicles all ran on the taxis and the rickshaws all run on CNG, which is compressed natural gas, which is really cool. We don't have that in the U.S. or I mean, if we do, I've never seen it, but it's a cleaner burning fuel than like petroleum or diesel. So that's nice.
That's new, right?
It was being implemented when I was there, but I think the widespread use of it is new. But that's supposed to help. Delhi itself is kind of in a valley, which contributes to its smog problem. But let's be clear, it is really dirty. Delhi, it's not uncommon to see people wearing masks. Both of us started coughing.
I got sick from the
although nothing like Kathmandu was. But Delhi is it's dirty, and there were days we stayed at a hotel where there was an air quality meter, where it told you what the air quality was outside and in the hotel, because they had like an air filtration system. It was a big selling point of the hotel, this air filtration system. But anyways, and it had some number that didn't make any sense. But suffice to say, the hotel rooms, like the air quality was like 3 or whatever, which to us seemed normal. But in Delhi, it was like 70, like 68 or something like that, which seems much worse. So things were like dusty. The only respite really was when it rained. It rained a couple times. I kind of cleaned it out a little bit. But like during the day and the afternoon with like cars and the heat, it would just be like walking around, you'd be like, oof, it just like is a lot. If you're not used to it in particular.
Let's talk about some of the good things that we really like about India. For me, I have to say that my favorite thing about India was the food. Oh my gosh, the food was so good. And John and I are following a vegetarian diet, and so for us, being in India was like hog heaven, because a large population...
Without hogs at all. No hogs.
A large population of India is vegetarian, and you see cows roaming the street because cows are holy in Hinduism. And so the ability of Indian chefs to flavor and make dishes savory and amazing is so high. I loved the food. Every meal we had, the nicest restaurants and the least nice restaurants.
Yeah, we had amazing food.
It was just amazing. And I will say that it's different than Indian food in the United States. Indian food in the United States seems to be more like feast food, or Americanized a little bit, and a lot heavier, and it kind of sits in my stomach, and I have it very infrequently in the United States because I find it to be very heavy. But in India, I didn't find it to be cooked as heavily.
I love the food. I would say my favorite part of India that I experienced in 2007 and also today are the people of India. So the people of India, India has an amazing service culture, and I don't mean service like they devote themselves to, but just a hospitality culture. which is very evident in restaurants, in hotels, and almost anything where there's a customer service relationship, like you're going to buy something or whatever. It can kind of be a little bit perverted if they're trying to sell you something like that you don't want to buy. But in general, it's a really refreshing culture where, because obviously we're tourists and guests, people were very, very welcoming to us, very, very nice to us. Indian people in general are just very nice people. They like Americans. I mean, we're Americans. They like talking about our differences and where we're from. People are very curious to learn about us.
A lot of people would approach us and just ask for a selfie and stuff, which made me feel like a celebrity.
Yeah, I love Indian people. I think that they're, like, as a group, they're some of the nicest people I've ever encountered.
I totally agree. I gotta second that. And, our real insight into Indian culture is provided by our good friend Aditya, who has really shown for us, through himself and his friends and his family, the beauty of, Indian people and how kind and warm and loving they really are. Indian families tend to be a lot larger and live together for a lot longer than in the United States, and we really sensed the the community orientedness of Indian people while we were there. The West tends to be a little bit more individualistic, and India seems to be more community focused. So, and particularly I find interesting the relationship between the genders in India. So when I was ill, Aditya was just so focused on caring for me. I think there's a sense of women a little bit being on a little bit of a pedestal. And so the feeling of he used to joke with John when they were both students at Cornell Law School that if I was ill, John wasn't giving me enough mangoes, and he had all these home remedies and spiritual and Ayurvedic thoughts. But he gave me 4 different types of medicine and got me tea and was making sure that his mom cared for me and stuff. And I found that really sweet and endearing.
Yeah. Long and short, we had an amazing experience in India. I think India has a lot of positives, some things that are hard for people from the West, I think, to fully realize. I really want to say, if you've never been to India and you're planning to take a trip to India, our philosophy when we went in, and we talked about this all the time, on our flight, is don't have expectations. And I don't mean don't expect that you're going to have a good time or whatever, but don't, the idea in the West, particularly in the US, I think in Western Europe, where things are going to happen perfectly, they're going to run on time, everything's going to be, spot exactly where you want it. That's not the case in India, and it's not the case in a lot of the developing world, but certainly not in India, not in Delhi. And don't go in thinking that everything's going to be perfect.
It's not. Your
flights are going to be delayed.
You're going to be going to the bathroom.
Things.
You're going to be going to the bathroom in a non-Western toilet, which is a hole in the ground.
Right. You might not have toilet paper. Stuff's not going to be perfect. It's just the way that it is, and it's not a reflection. It's not a bad thing. I think that if you have a mindset that I expect something to happen, you're going to think, "Oh, this is bad because it didn't happen." But it's just a function of how India is. It's not a wealthy country relative to the West. It just doesn't have that type of culture and infrastructure where the expectation is that everything happens exactly perfectly on time. I mean, our flights were canceled different times for different reasons in Nepal and India. All sorts of things weird happened, and our mindset was, look, it's just the way that it is. So there's a way to do India wrong, which is, I think, to come in with a mindset and think, I am expecting this to be, the sort of trip that I would take when I go to Stockholm, which is another trip that we did,
cultural
or Berlin
imperialism,
or whatever.
inserting your cultural values and expecting the rest of the country to conform. You've got to get on their level, you got to get on their page and accept the country for what it is.
And you can do India in different ways. If you want to have a really luxury experience, you can do the most luxurious hotels you've ever been to. Honestly, truly, 100%. I mean, some of the best hotels I've ever been to. I actually recommend
it because the dollar goes so far that for the price of the Holiday Inn, you can get a 5-star resort, and it's a real treat.
Yeah, or if you want to do India on a budget, you can do it that way too. And on a budget, meaning literally a couple dollars a day, you can do an amazing time.
If you're a young student, maybe do it. But if you're where we are in life and you're don't do it.
Sure. The point being is you can experience India in different ways, and I would encourage everybody, if you've never been to India before, don't come in with expectations about other places you've been. Come in expecting it to be raw and visceral and everything else, and that's it. And if you do that, you won't be disappointed and you have a great time.
You're going to want to visit it in another 10 years and see how it's changed.
It will change. It will change.
It's continuing to change, and the people and the food and the culture are absolute treasures.
Yeah, if you're a vegan or vegetarian and you haven't been to India, you're really missing out. You need to go. But yeah, we had an amazing time. We're probably not going to go back immediately, although we might for our friend's wedding, but we'll definitely go back again in the future. I loved it. I had a great, it's one of my favorite vacations ever. I think both of our favorite vacations ever. We're going to do some more videos on India and our experiences, particularly our hike in Nepal, which was unbelievable.
We're going to show you guys a lot more about this particular trip, kind of like a travel vlog.
But in the meantime, stay well, stay happy. Please comment on this video if you've been to India. We'd love to hear your experiences. We'll see you in the next video.
Thanks, guys. Until next time, do well and always make things better. Bye, guys.